Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. I'm really excited to have Nate here. We just learned that we are both here in Colorado, and that's really cool. So welcome, Nate.
Thanks. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
That's so cool. So why don't you just start sort of at the beginning for you, like, I don't know, your first drink or high school or earlier, where it all kind of started.
Sure. I guess important background to know is that I didn't really drink much, maybe a drink or two, like, ever before I was 21. Like when I was in high school, I didn't drink. When I was in college, I wasn't really the person who would go and get drunk on the weekends or on Friday night or whatever. I was more the kind of person who would go and like hike a mountain in the middle of the night with my friends, and I loved that. I loved being that person that was didn't have to be dependent on alcohol to have a good time. And so, yeah, that's really my background as far as that goes. My first like real drink was in December when I turned 21. I was in engineering school, and my friends weren't about to let me study my way. It was finals week, and they weren't about to let me study my way through my 21st birthday. And so they made me a cup of coffee with some Baileys in it, and that was like really my first drink, my first actual drink, which I think is hilarious. And then
That's awesome.
Yeah. So beyond that, I guess the first time I actually started drinking was like once I had turned 21, I drank here and there. But the first time I actually remembered using alcohol, I guess in a negative way, is after I ran my first half marathon. This was in college, and I didn't train that well. And so it wasn't a particularly enjoyable experience. And I don't know why, but for some reason that day I just had it in my head that I was going to get drunk. And that was the first time that I did. It was on peppermint schnapps, which was an awful idea.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got far too inebriated. That was my first time being anything more than gypsy. So you can imagine how that went.
And this was after the running, so you're already dehydrated and all that sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it was a terrible idea.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's so funny. And then so from there, kind of how'd the story continue?
Sure. From there, I not all at once, but that was my introduction to alcohol and its really effective ability to kind of suppress emotions for the time being, or I think that's a good way to say it. It's like, if you want to turn your mind off for a second, you can drink. And that was really my first experience with that. And through college, alcohol was there, but never really like a big, like I said, I wasn't that type of person. And I would say I really started to be addicted to alcohol when I went through a particularly emotional time. There was somebody in my life who, just a good friend of mine who just like up and left, and I was living alone at that point, and had been drinking for 5 years at that point, and so I knew all too well the effects of alcohol and what I could use it for, and all of that. And this friend of mine just up and left, and it really sent me into a tailspin. And naturally, or maybe not, maybe that's the wrong word for it, but I turned to alcohol to cope with my emotions.
Yeah.
And as a lot of people do, right? But looking back on it, I don't know, just not, I just wish I had done it differently, you know?
Yeah, and that is really, I mean, pretty much every story has that point, whether it's very overt, like, okay, you remember somebody leaving, or whether it's really just a little thing where all of a sudden you are, but when we start drinking to deal with emotions, to self-medicate, that
Right.
is very often where we get out of the driver's seat and where we get into the passenger seat and start being taken for this ride that we never expected to be on.
Right. Right. And so from there, I mean, what that led to was depression, which is not, you know, like I'm the fun loving kid who doesn't drink. Like how did this happen? You know? And that was a really hard thing to admit. Going to counseling for the first time was a really hard thing to admit. But I finally got to the point where my best friend told me, like, you need to go see a therapist. I'm going with you if that's what it takes. And to have somebody that knows my life that well, and for him not to be scared to say something like that was really the exact thing that I needed in that moment. So I guess from there, went through counseling, you know, to deal with loss and grief, and didn't really touch much on the alcohol subject, but I guess that wasn't really the root cause. And slowly but pretty consistently came out of my depression, and you know, life was looking up. And
were you in college still at this time, or had you graduated, or what?
This was while I had graduated. Sorry, yeah, I was out of college by this point. Yeah, and that was, let's see, that was probably 4 or 5 years ago now.
Cool.
Yeah, and so since then, there have been, it feels like there's been a cycle. Like there was one year I took 9 months off from drinking, but then there were other, you know, seasons of my life where it would be, I felt like I needed alcohol to cope with the emotions again, and so since then I knew that I was addicted, even though I had tried to, you know, I had given it up for pretty long periods of time. But every time I would start drinking again, there was still this part of me that was like, this is all you need, and, you know, this is the way to handle your emotions. There's this allure to alcohol that it had, and so I just kept falling into the same old trap. You know, I'd have a bad day, come home, have a beer, it would turn into 5, and, you know, feel like shit the next day.
Yeah.
Like, you know, every maybe not everybody, but most people know what I'm talking about when I say that. It really was the way that I took the edge off of life for a long time. The thing that I that I guess recently there was a catalyst that helped me make the decision that I didn't want to drink anymore, ever. And I guess to fully tell this story, I need to go back to when I was in college. When I was in college, midway through school, my grandfather committed suicide. And that was difficult. Like anybody who's been touched by suicide knows, like that is something that I don't wish on my worst enemies. And that was really hard. And I don't recall necessarily drinking a lot when that happened. I'm sure there were days, but that wasn't like the moment that I remember using alcohol to cope with my emotions. It just happened to fall in that same time period. So fast forward to about 2.5 months ago, one of my close friends, while he had been drinking a whole lot, attempted suicide. Mm-hmm. And it was just an attempt, thank God. He was admitted to a mental health facility for a little bit, and then spent some time with a substance abuse counselor, which was really, really good for him. But the moment I got the call telling me that he had attempted suicide, there was something in my mind that was just like, this is it. Like I don't need this in my life anymore. If this is the kind of stuff that alcohol does to people, like I don't need this in my life.
Right.
And it really got me thinking about, I played the tapes of all the old tapes that we have of being drunk, right? And I kind of made this mental checklist. And the conclusion that I came to, which I think is something that you say in the first couple of chapters of your book, is that alcohol takes more than it gives. Like, don't get me wrong, I've had some really great times with friends drinking, right? Like, but those moments are totally overshadowed by the moments in life where alcohol has just stolen something from me. Mm-hmm. And when I came to this realization, like I said, it was kind of a no-brainer. It's like, why would I continue drinking if it just continues to be net negative in my life? It's not adding value to my life overall. It's taking away.
Yeah.
And around this time, somebody had, a few months before that, somebody had recommended your book to me, and I didn't read it, obviously. And right around the time where my friend attempted suicide, somebody else, a different friend of mine, actually the friend that told me I needed to go to counseling way back when, he recommended this book to me. And, I thought I'd give it a shot. And, I kind of come to my own conclusions about alcohol. And then I started your book. And at that point, it was just confirmation of what I had been feeling the whole time, right? This isn't good for me, and it's taken more than it's given. And, yeah, it was really just confirmation that this was what I needed to do in life. And this is how I needed to handle alcohol. Yeah, so I guess for that, thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, I didn't. It's amazing to me how. It's amazing to me how society is so willing to accept this one drug, right? And that's a big part of what you've written about. It's why this one? Why not crack? Like why this drug is it all of a sudden socially acceptable to do? And it's interesting too that we as a society have decided to overlook how terrible it is. And man, it just shocks me, like realizing how terrible alcohol really is for the human body. Like that's not something that's ever brought up in society, right? And you know, maybe it's because everybody wants a way to take the edge off. I don't know, or I don't know the reason for that, but it just, it fascinates me. It fascinates me.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I think that I always like to think, you know, this example of, well, what would happen if we discovered alcohol today with everything we now know? Like if we had all the evidence, all the studies, and we just found it, like
Right.
how would our society react? You know, we'd run the other way screaming.
Right.
We certainly wouldn't be like, okay, let's put this on advertisements that kids see,
Right.
you know, and
Right.
that would never happen.
And drink it around kids and drink it, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
And it's such an interesting thing because I'm a little bit similar to you. I did drink in high school, but not all that much.
Right.
And but then in college, I didn't drink all that much. And my husband, his first drink was when he was 21.
Yeah.
And so it was like this interesting thing of it still gets you. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't necessarily matter that you have a childhood sort of, you know, addiction and something happened in childhood or something. It can just be like this very happy, go lucky, well-adjusted person. And then, yeah, it's just so interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason I was so prone to turn to alcohol to cope with emotions was my first job out of college was very pro alcohol. It was an engineering firm, and it was, you know, there was no ping pong table in the office, but there was a beer fridge, that sort of office. And, you know, that was it was interesting. It was an interesting way for like an interesting transition from school where everybody was drinking to work where everybody was still drinking. But I thought in my mind, like once you left college, that stopped. And it wasn't uncommon to, you know, for people in the office, including me, to have 3 or 4 beers and sit the rest of the day at your desk doing nothing because you couldn't, you know?
Right.
I won't mention them by name, but
yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I mean, it's you know, I think there's some crazy statistic about how many billions of hours are lost every year in the United States to productivity, and like the financial burden, not only from lost productivity, which is just so interesting because alcohol like directly loses, like why would you run a business and like purposely make your employees unable to perform? I don't know, that wouldn't make sense, but I guess to attract the people who are already boozing, so like that also doesn't make sense. Like I don't know, there's so many
yeah.
But then also just I have a good friend who's a firefighter up in Fort Collins actually, and he and I were talking about this one day about just his firehouse. I think there's 12 firehouses in Fort Collins, and it's about a city of, I think, 100,000 people about. So it's a relatively small city.
Right.
And his firehouse takes 3,000 calls a year about. And of those calls, he said 80 to 85% of them are alcohol related. Whoa. So the cost of the money that it takes to just run his firehouse, you know, we could have fewer fire trucks, fewer fire stations, fewer, you know, like the cost of, and that's not talking about police, that's not talking about doctors, that's not talking about hospitals. Right. I mean, the financial impact on the US society because of alcohol is just mind-boggling. And when he told me that, I was like, whoa, you're kidding me. And he's like, no, they're all alcohol related. Almost, it's very rare for him to get called out on a scene that is not alcohol related, whether it's traffic or domestic or whatever the case is. And yeah, it's just really interesting. And the other thing that you said, you know, that we should just touch on because it's so important, but the statistic is that alcohol is in 70% of suicide victims' blood at the time of death. So it's not a joke, it really does take away your ability to be that happy-go-lucky person and experience joy, and it dampens and numbs that. You cannot numb selectively. You can't numb the bad stuff without numbing all the good stuff.
Yeah.
And then eventually it tells your brain that it's the only thing that it needs to feel better. But then eventually, as tolerance progresses and the addiction progresses, that stops working. And when that stops working and the thing that you thought was the only thing bringing you joy no longer brings you joy, you really feel faced with a joyless life. And that really can lead to dark and nasty places. And the craziest part about it is that we don't recognize pretty much anywhere along that journey, maybe until the very end, we don't recognize that alcohol was actually the thing. I mean, I very, very vividly remember thinking alcohol is the thing giving me joy. It is not definitely the thing taking it away.
Right.
Just don't make that connection.
Right. No, I don't. I didn't really either for a long time, and I agree with you. I think that's a hard thing for people to recognize.
Have you read the book A Brave New World?
No, I haven't. It's on my bookshelf.
Well, you should read it. I think you'd really like it because and it's interesting, especially if you have any, conspiracy theories or whatever. But basically, there's a substance in A Brave New World called Soma, and it is very reminiscent of what we're doing as a culture with alcohol. Like, there's a lot of really bad stuff happening in our world, and we are turning a blind eye by turning on the television and, opening a beer. And like, that is, you have to wonder like, wow, that's really interesting. And I've been asked recently why it's kind of top of mind is I've been asked recently, well, how do you deal with all this stuff? Like, how do you deal with everything that's going on in the world and all the pain that's on the news and all the stuff if you're not drinking? Right. And I was like, well, kind of the point is like, we got to get pissed. Like, we got to get upset. We have to feel those emotions, because otherwise, if we're just drinking, none of us are going to rally and do anything about it. And if we all think that like it's somebody else's issue to solve, the government or, anything else, like we're not going to make much progress. We got to take it upon ourselves, really. And it's just so interesting because I think that we experience pain when we see stuff going wrong for a reason. And when we numb that pain, stuff can just continue to go wrong unchecked rampantly. I mean, I think a lot of the reason that alcohol has got to where it's gotten to is because it's numbed us to the fact that it is what it is. And that's combined with the fact that it's deceived us into thinking it's the duct tape holding our lives together, rather than the insidious, cracks that are actually breaking everything apart. And so it's kind of this whole ball of, mess. But well, let me ask you the question that I sort of ask everybody at the end. And that's really like, if you had to, go back and talk to Nate of sort of before you'd made this decision beforehand, when you really felt like, especially maybe the Nate of when you first got handed the book or talked to and you're like, no, that's not for me. What would you sort of tell him about what life is like to?
I mean, I would nothing drastic, I don't think. But really just you have these feelings because like you have these feelings about alcohol for a reason. Listen to it. Like you have these doubts about whether alcohol is actually adding value to your life. Address that sooner rather than later. I think I think that's good. I think stick with your gut.
Listen. Listen to the voice.
Yeah, stick with your gut on how you think or what role you think alcohol is playing in your life, because it is deceiving you.
Absolutely. I think I wish I would have had that advice for myself too. I mean, because on one hand, it's all part of our path and we have to go through it to get where we are and all that sorts of stuff. I really believe that's true. But on the other hand, man, I had a lot of whispers a lot of years of whispering of, something's not right here.
Right.
And, it would be great to listen to that a bit more. It's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And part of me wishes I could go back and, go back to the Nate before I ran my that first half marathon, right? And say, like, I would probably use strong language, but like, don't touch the stuff, like, look at your life now. Do you like where your life is at now? Like, continue to not drink if you want your life to look similar. So that probably is a more drastic advice than I said before, being handed the book the first time.
That's really cool. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nate. This has been really great. I really appreciate it. It's such a moving story, especially because I think it touches on such an important topic, and one that we don't necessarily like to talk about, but I think it is really important.
Me too.
This has been Annie Grace with This Naked Mind podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more at thisnakedmind.com. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, as it really helps us spread the word.